Thanks for coming to Adult Ed today. Should be an interesting time and topic. You should have brought a few friends with you as you came in here. And I think folks will regret that they weren't here. But we'll have some people funnel in as we come. Let's just begin with prayer, shall we? Lord, thank you for this opportunity to talk and to think more on the topic of your justice in this world. Thank you for bringing Kurt and Joanne here with us today. We ask that you would continue to bless their efforts and their organization. And Lord, do your will through them, and bless us in this time now. Give us your Spirit as we engage over this topic today. In Jesus' name, Amen. Come on up, you guys, and you can have either mic corded or.
I'll use this one because then I can use both my hands. Thanks for coming to Adult Ed. Peter said you should have brought some friends, and I'm thinking this is like bigger than our whole church in Nueva Suyapa, so it's great that you all wanted to stay and hear a little bit more. Kurt and I were thinking that there we go. That it might be helpful to start out with a little bit more of an introduction of ourselves and our organization, and then Kurt's going to come up. He's actually going to put you to work, so get ready to do a little thinking this morning. So I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Kurt grew up on the south side of Chicago. We met at Calvin University, and went to Central America literally 1 month after we graduated, which was 3 weeks after we got married. So it was all kind of a rush in there. And our intention was only to stay in Central America for 2 years, working with what then was CRWRC, now World Renew. And we fell in love with Central America. We loved Spanish. We loved the food, the culture. And honestly, we just never went back to the States. So it's been 35 years now of us just loving the country of Honduras. We went to Costa Rica the first 2 years and then moved to Honduras. So pretty much our whole lives we've been in Honduras. And we never honestly made a decision that, this is where we're going to spend the rest of our lives, but it appears to be where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. So, and that's a good place to be. We have, I mentioned in our message that we have 2 adult kids, Anna and Noah. We also, a few years back, adopted our Honduran daughter, Andrea. She was 21 when we adopted her. And we're partly here this week because she's going to graduate from Calvin on Saturday. So we're excited about that as well. Kurt's clapping because it was kind of a long haul for her graduating, so we're excited about it. So I would just want to tell you a little bit more about ASJ for those of you who are hearing about it for the first time. Kurt and I, in Honduras, we worked for World Renew. Then we also started a semester abroad program through Calvin University, which we called Justice Studies, and we had about 500 Calvin students come on our program. And we did it for 25 years, all the way through the start of the pandemic, and then it ended. But at the same time that we started our semester abroad program, we started ASJ, because it felt like all our efforts through World Renew were really important, but there always felt like there was this piece missing, that the people who were living the most vulnerable conditions needed more than what we were giving them and training them in agricultural techniques or health. It was that, and we realized finally that it was that piece that is what I was talking about with my neighbors, the fact that people only have one option for their education, for their health, and that they depend completely on the Honduran government to provide good services, good public schools, and good hospitals. So we started talking with Honduran friends about what could we do to make the Honduran government work better? What could we do to make them provide services the way that they should, in a way that is just, in the way that God would like so that people can flourish. So we've spent the last 25 years trying to figure that out. It's been a lot of trial and error. But what we settled on was that we would focus on the areas of health, education, security, and security mostly being the police. How if the police aren't doing their jobs well, it's very difficult to have a rule of law in a country or even in a neighborhood. So how can we get the Honduran police to do their jobs better? And then we do that the way that Kurt explained on his one side. We try to figure out what is the problem, then we tell everybody about it and get the media's attention on it, and then try to work with the government to figure out what the solutions are. And we always try to not complain about something, not point out all the problems if we don't have ideas for how those things can be solved. So we always feel like if the Honduran government would just listen, things could improve faster. And that's what we're always working to do, is to get the Honduran government to respond and make the changes that are necessary to make life more just for those who are most vulnerable. Because in the end, if we read our Bibles carefully, God always says that we're to do justice for those whose lives are the hardest. And sometimes that's the hardest place to start, but it's also amazing when it happens. So that's a little bit about ASJ. I'm going to have Kurt come up and tell you what, there's lots of people coming in. You missed the part where I said you're going to be put to work right now. So, no, you're fine. I'm giving you a heads up that don't get too comfortable.
All right. Is this working? Yes? So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you half a story. Then I'm going to have you work in little groups figuring out what you would do. Then I'm going to tell you what we did, a little sum up, and then I think we'll have some time for questions and answers. So that's the plan for the rest of this piece. So Joanne showed you the neighborhood we lived in. It's called Nueva Suyapa. And just a little bit more info about our neighborhood. We lived in a upper middle class neighborhood. And we were teaching college students about poverty and justice and working in Honduras. And there was a part of me, both of us, that always felt like if we're going to talk about all of this stuff, we ought to do it more. And so we were always going to a church in our neighborhood, but we lived outside of it, and there was something that made us always want to move up there. And then Joanne and I have a really good friend, my best friend, Carlos Hernandez. He and his wife moved up into this neighborhood. And this is the neighborhood, I don't know about Milwaukee, okay, let's just figure it out. In Milwaukee, what would be the worst place to live? 06 zip code? Okay, so the most dangerous part of Milwaukee. Our neighborhood is that, right? People don't like to hire people from our neighborhood because they're afraid they would be involved in gangs. The neighborhood has a bad reputation. We think it's worse. The reputation is worse than it deserves, but there are problems there. So Carlos, our friend, moved there first, and he really liked it. And we were like, well, that's cool. That's kind of what we were always tempted to do, but we're a little afraid to. And now Carlos did it, so we're going to try it too. And originally we were going to do it for a year, and now we've been there 20 plus. So in our neighborhood, we had been there a couple of years, and let me get this story straight in my head a minute. I came home from work one day. Our kids were little, 6 and 9, and they were both very worked up, and Joanne was trying to calm them down. It was dinner time, and what's going on? And they said, well, Brian was Noah's friend. Brian's dad was leaving this morning. He is a peddler. I don't even know if, my grandpa peddled fruits and vegetables. But a peddler would put stuff in a car, or in a truck in this case, a pickup truck, and he sells fruits and vegetables in the street. And he has a microphone like that. He drives through the street going, broccoli, 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 oranges, and tells them the price, and people come out and buy it. So he was going down to buy fruits and vegetables that morning, probably had around $100 in his pocket. And 3 guys with masks showed up and put a gun to him and said, give us all of your cash. So I'm finding this out from Carlos, I always mix up this story at the beginning. I come home, kids are upset. They say Brian's dad was killed. I go next door to Carlos, who's the principal of our kids' school. And Carlos says, this is the facts. So Brian's dad sold fruits and vegetables out of the back of a pickup truck. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, he was leaving with his pickup truck, $100 in his pocket. 3 guys show up with ski masks on and a pistol, put a pistol to his head, give us your $100. He doesn't resist. There's no fight. There's no protest. He hands over the $100, and for no reason, one of the 3 guys shoots him in the head and kills him. So this gets to the kids' school. So my kids get sent home from school that day because, everybody was upset and didn't know what to happen, a little bit afraid, like what's going to happen next. And so when I come home from work, my kids are upset, and I go and talk to Carlos, and he tells me this story. So I go back home, we have dinner, put the kids to bed, pray, try and calm them down. And the next day thinking about it, but like those sorts of things happen in all of our lives. And over the next few days, it faded. About 3 days later, Carlos came to my house, and he said, you need to help me figure out what to do, talking to Joanne and I. The widow came to my office today, the widow of Brian's dad, and she knows who did it. Because these guys had ski masks on, as they run away, they're taking their ski masks off, and they're neighbors of ours. They live 3 blocks away. And we have 2 people who saw them, and they're willing to testify. So, what do? Right? We live in a very dangerous neighborhood. These guys are neighbors of ours. They just showed that they could kill someone for no reason. The widow knows who they are. There are 2 witnesses, but they also live in our neighborhood. They also have kids. And Carlos is like, what should we do? Should we go to the police station in our neighborhood where there's 3 or 4 cops 24 hours a day, but they're part of the neighborhood? What should we do? So that's your assignment for a few minutes. I want you to maybe like 3 or 4 people around you. Like, what would you do? And if you have a hard time imagining yourself in Honduras, imagine yourself in the worst neighborhood of Milwaukee. Like, what would you do there? So you are Christian, you're trying to do the right thing, you want justice for this woman and you want to save other people, but you don't know what to do. Good? I don't know why. Sometimes I'm messing up this story.
No, you told it perfectly. I'm just going to add one more detail and Kurt was kind of implying this, but there's a lot of fear. And there's a lot of mistrust of, what will happen if I just go straight to the police? What will that put my life in danger as well? So that's kind of the context of our neighborhood is this lack of trust.
Yeah, so I should have said that. So you don't know if the cops are going to go and arrest the guys, or the cops are going to tell the bad guys who told on them, right? That's what we don't know. So what do? So we'll do like 3, 4, 5 minutes. All of you have to do this. It's not optional assignment here. Find 3, 4 people. What would you do? All right. I hope you've all solved it. So I don't think we have time for every group to report, but let's start with the naughty boys in the back. What'd you guys come up with? Whoever considers themselves the naughty boys in the back of the room, what'd you come up with?
I was nothing but trouble in school. So we collaborated here, and some good ideas I think came up. Number one, there's a sense that corrupt or not corrupt, to a certain extent, you've got to get the authorities involved. I think we also agreed that there's strength in numbers, so that rather than identifying a witness here and there, you gather a community of folks together and go to the authorities. Now, you had mentioned, I think, in the context that you had gotten to know a number of your neighbors quite well. In fact, the principal came to you. So you already, in your case, you already had this really strong network of individuals. And if you had a leader at least, or maybe a few, who can gather folks together and sort of present the community case, hey, we're all witnesses. We're all in this together. It's not Sam. It's not Judy. If you're going to kill us all, to the bad guys, you're going to have to do that. I think there's strength in numbers. So those were some ideas.
Nice. Can tell you were troublemakers. How about back in that corner? Somebody.
I think you came up with a lot to say. The fact that, here in Brookfield, in the worst community, the worst area in Milwaukee, and in Honduras, you're all going to think about it differently in each location. Because justice might be a little bit different in all those places. And yet, the right thing to do is to get as many people together, despite the fear that's probably there, and try to do the right thing, and try to protect yourself as best you can while doing the right thing.
Yep. Yeah, and fear is big, right? Especially when it's your kids. How about somebody over here on the... I'll just open up. Anybody want to raise your hand if something else you want to add or that your group came up with? Yeah.
We talked about the need to protect the witness, the standing of the witness, that you get it down right away and write a letter, document everything, and make sure that the entire neighborhood stands with them and they're not immediately identified. So, you have to show cause.
Yep. Nice. Yeah.
You may have said that we need to start off with prayer and find that there's a local leader who can stand for the victims and for the witnesses to go before the public and like have a unified voice in all of this, but let God, the Holy Spirit lead this, and what just the scripture says. Lord, do justice, Lord, mercy.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
I'll contact things for you.
Let's pull someone else in who can, yeah. Well, yes, I'll tell you a little bit more of what we did. Anybody in this area want to add something? So, very good ideas, and lots of pieces of those you'll end up hearing in the story that we ended up doing. So this happened, the witnesses showed up, or the widow showed up in Carlos's office, talked to her, trying to figure out what to do. That night, what Carlos and I said is, let's see if we can find somebody we know, like that someone we can trust, that's close to the police, that's in the police, who can help us figure this out. Carlos called a couple of people. I called a couple of people. I knew a lawyer that was very well connected, and she said, don't go to the police. Like, you don't know who you're going to be talking to, and you may put everyone at greater risk than not. And then about 2 or 3 months went by. And I would call once in a while my lawyer friend, and Carlos would call his friends, and we're working on it. I'm not sure how much they were working on it. I'm not sure how much we wanted them to work on it, because we were afraid. We felt like we had done something, but we were probably afraid to do a whole lot more. And then I was coming home from work another day, and Joanne called me before I left and said, don't come right now. There's a helicopter over our house. There's cop cars everywhere. We're not sure what's happening. And so I waited, and then Joanne said, here, come on up. And it ended up that those 3 guys had killed an off-duty cop. And the cops in the area had seen it and had chased them. And they had holed up in a house near our house. And in the end, they shot one of them and arrested 2 of them. And that was kind of the end of this group of 3. And Carlos and I think it was the Sunday afterwards, were sitting at his house drinking tea. And we started talking about this experience and what we had done and what we hadn't done. And Carlos said, these were just such bad guys. Like, it seemed like they had no compunction whatsoever about killing people. He said, I know around by my church, they killed A, B, and C. And I was like, well, around my church, I know about X and Y and Z. And we started talking, and then we did a little research. And we found out that from the time we knew who they were till the time that they were captured and killed, they had killed at least 13 more people in my neighborhood in like 3 months. And almost all men, and almost all robberies like that, often in front of their families, where the people handed over the money and they killed them anyway. And Carlos and I felt, and I feel terrible, because we knew who they were. We had 2 witnesses, and we were paralyzed, I don't know paralyzed, but almost paralyzed by fear for our own kids, for the witnesses, for the widow. And I think you're right, like there is protection in group, but bad guys also can say, well, we'll pick off 1 or 2 or the leader, and that will put fear, and it will destroy the group. Right? And who wants, I don't want to be that one. I don't want the witnesses to be the one. So all of this it's rough. So we're sitting drinking tea in Carlos's living room and talking about this. And we're like, what were we missing? Like, what did we really need in order to feel confident about taking that next step with those witnesses? We're like, well, if we would have known 1 cop who was Christian, who we could trust, we would have been willing to do that. That's what we were looking for. I was calling people, Carlos was calling, because we wanted someone we could trust. That's what was missing. Some of the stuff you're talking about too is how to build trust within the community. And we were like, if we could have handed this over to 1 cop who would have done a good job, we would have. And then you need the prosecutor's office is the next step. The police investigate, hand it over to the prosecutor who brings it to trial. We needed 1 lawyer. And Carlos and I started thinking, like, what if we could find 1, like, Christian cop or an ex-cop? Because what does the Christian ex-cop know? He knows who all in the police force you can trust and who you can't, right? Because if somebody's worked there 15 years, 15 years going to this church, lots of people about the church. You work in the police force for 15 years, you know lots of And you know that there's at least these 5 or 6 that are really good and that will do a good job with this case. So I don't know if we would do it again, but that's what we decided to do. We said, what if we can recruit one good ex-cop or cop who's a Christian who will take care of this, and one lawyer. And we did. And we interviewed a bunch of people. We found this guy. And we said, we have these 13 homicides in our neighborhood. What can you do? And he ended up doing research. And in our neighborhood, there was about 40,000 people in our neighborhood. We had 52 homicides that year. A homicide a week. Like, how many people live in this area? 40,000? Maybe? So imagine having one homicide a week here. And we hired this one guy, and it took us and him a long time to start meeting with neighbors who are victims in these cases. Nobody trusted him, nobody trusted us, but there was some trust built from our relationships and our connections. And this ex-cop got trust by association with us. And we said, it's a Christian organization, we're going to do this. And in the end, he got the first family willing to entrust the case to him. And we got the first witnesses that were willing to testify. And then that case went to trial. And then that family convinced the next family and the next family. And we went from 52 homicides in 2005 to 8 homicides in 2008. In 3 years, I don't know what that is, and 80% reduction in the violence in our neighborhood because of 2 people, one investigator and one lawyer, who connected people in the neighborhood who were victims with trustworthy, and we ended up finding out there's good cops. We just didn't know who they were. There's good prosecutors. We didn't know who they were. They want to solve these cases, but the community doesn't trust the cops, and the cops don't trust the communities. Maybe I'll just add one more thing. When we started talking to cops, the cops said, I have kids. You know, Eric says, what's your name? Brad. So Eric says that Brad killed his sister. And now I'm the cop. And I know Brad has guns. He's a member of the gang. Who knows how many people are in the house? At 5 o'clock in the morning, I have to knock down Brad's door and go in there and try and arrest him because Eric testified. I could well get killed. And then what's going to happen? Brad's in jail. Eric has to show up in 24 hours to say, yes, Brad is, and identify him, and then the process goes forward. How many of you think Eric's going to show up in Honduras 24 hours later? And if he doesn't, Brad goes free. So I just risked my life knocking down Brad's door, arresting a gang member who has weapons and maybe other gang members with him. I risked my life. And Eric, he probably did do it. And Eric was really mad right after his sister was killed. But after you get arrested and 24 hours later, now he doesn't want to risk his life, other lives. And so Brad goes free. So it all makes sense, right? The community doesn't trust the police. The police don't trust the community. The witnesses don't want to show up. They're afraid of the cops and they're afraid of the other perpetrators. And the whole system falls apart because of lack of trust. So in the end, what we were able to do with 2 people is start to recreate those bonds of trust. So that homicides went down from 52 to 8 in just 3 years. And they've stayed down. So this was 2008, 2009 to the present. We've had the highest was 12, the lowest was 4. So it's still more violent than around here, but way less violent than in the rest of the Honduras. And that, should I just go to maybe a little of the police purge or not? No, okay. So I'll sum up and then we can just have some time for questions and answers. What I want to tell with both of these stories, several things. With the education work that I talked about, Joy and I talked about during the sermon, our work in our neighborhood on violence here, we ended up doing something very similar in the whole country. I think lots of times when we talk about justice, it feels like something that would take forever, and it's super complicated. Like, how do you bring down violence in Milwaukee? How do you improve the public schools in Milwaukee? Or your local schools, or the hospital, the healthcare system, teenage pregnancy? Like, pick your issue. And it feels like, oh, we could never do that. And I hope that, like the examples Joy and I have given, there wasn't hundreds of us. We didn't have huge teams. We weren't super experts in this. We were people trying to be faithful to that God's call to do justice in our own neighborhoods. 2 or 3 people being, I would say, like hopeful, creative, and persistent. Like we picked a thing and we just kept going at it. And it sometimes took a year, sometimes it took 3 or 4 years. Never took much longer than that. And we were hopeful, like, we can do that. Like, with God's help, we can do this. And we were creative. We were trying to figure out, like, if this doesn't work, we'll try that. And God has been faithful to us. So I think, like, challenging you as individuals, families, churches, like, what is it like? I don't know. I'm hoping, at least some of you, there's this topic that's on your shoulders that you feel like we should be doing something about that, right? And convincing you with ASJ's examples that you can, right? That you can make that difference. And it isn't that hard. It isn't, and God will bless that effort. And of course, always I would like you also to support what we're doing in Honduras at the same time. And in the back, there's some books. There's a book that Nick Waltersdorf and I wrote. Some of you may know him, a Christian philosopher. There's some books. There's some brochures. There's a pad going around with some place you can put your name and your email.
I just wanted to say one thing about that, because sorry, we did not say this in advance. So the name and the email is if you would like to get updates about ASJ, you want to pray for ASJ and the work that is going on there. We didn't mention that we are the only North Americans that are part of this organization. Everybody else, and it's almost 100 people, are really brave Hondurans who are doing this work. And they love to know that people are praying for them. So if you don't want to get updates or you don't want to get prayer updates, go ahead and find your name and scratch off your email. We were too excited to get started. Oh, you said? Oh, good job. Okay. All right. That's all.
5 minutes. If we have 1 or 2 questions.
4 minutes.
4 minutes, and then we'll wind up.
I was told we had to hard stop 11:45.
What kind of work are you doing in the hospital?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. One of the big things that we're doing right now is that the Honduran government is in charge of making sure that the public hospitals and clinics have medication. They have the medicines that people need, including insulin, blood pressure medication. 90% of Hondurans use the public health system, and they are down to almost no medicines, which is really frustrating because we have been trying very hard to get that whole process going. It's a new government in Honduras. They've gotten off to a slow start. So for us, that's what the vulnerable are suffering most right now is that they can't access medicine. So we're doing everything we can, meeting with people, holding press conferences to try and get the government to purchase those medicines and make them available. And there's other things too, but
Just super frustrating. The government has the money,
yeah,
but so it's a new government, not so new anymore. 15 months in, they just have not figured out the purchasing process and getting that all going. So so there's people with diabetes, high blood pressure that are not getting their meds, and you know how all of the complications from that. So that's a great example of the work we do too.
Another question?
It sounded like you guys were maybe able to make some progress with the teachers' unions. I mean, how does that work for you guys?
So I always want to clarify, there's very good people in the teachers union, but most of the leadership is not good, sadly. And so we have more and more are identifying often mid-level leadership within the teachers union who feel like, and it's true, we would argue for the same, that they should get paid on time and paid a just salary and all of that. But kids deserve to get their schooling. And so you can't just shut down the whole school system all the time around issues of payment, etc. So our relationship with the teachers union is largely antagonistic, I guess would be this. So we're putting out here what the issues are. One of the issues we put out is always teachers' pay, and that teachers should get paid on time and the right amounts. But that's only one issue for the education system, not the only one, and not the central one. Is that? One more? Okay.
Do you have consistent contacts in the government, despite government rollover or whatever? That for health issues you can go to this person or this ministry, or education issues you can go, or is it you're reinventing the wheel every time? Every time you do the government?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do make good contacts. We look for the people who want to work with us, and sometimes that's within the government, sometimes it's without, and then every 4 years you do that again, right? So it's 11:45. I know that you guys have to go get your Sunday school kids. Thank you so much for coming. Grab a brochure. And go do justice as the gems told you to.